So, sir, what does this minority government tell us about Canadian sentiment?
Well, I think it indicates the country's badly divided and the Parliament's divided, which is going to make it very difficult to reconcile some of these conflicting interests. I think division is the main thing that came out of the election, unfortunately.
You raised some hackles because you got involved in a quiet way behind the scenes. You helped raise some money through the Manning Centre that went to a third-party group which funded what were perceived as attack ads against the Liberals.
Yeah. Well, I actually don't like that whole social media third-party advertising approach myself, but we have some donors that felt in the last election the leftist center groups were far more numerous and far better funded than the conservative ones, so they wanted to support some of these groups. And so we said, okay, we'll put that through us, but we'll evaluate the results. Those that use it irresponsibly won't get any further funding in the future, and those that use it responsibly, maybe they'll get further funding in the future.
So it is indicative, though, of how angry Western people, Western donors, Western voters, Western business is about the results of this election.
Oh yes, I don't think Central Canada or Ottawa has any appreciation of how deep the sentiment is in Western Canada about basically a feeling that the Federation is operating unfairly towards particularly Alberta and Saskatchewan, and that the Trudeau government is completely out of touch with them. And it's on a whole host of fronts.
You say the worst thing that we could do as a country is ignore this Western dissatisfaction. What should the minority Liberal government do?
Well, I think this is a principle of particularly responding to populist movements, and this is far broader than Western Canada, the Trump phenomenon in the United States, the Brexit phenomenon in Britain. Often what the political establishment does is just completely ignore or dismiss this bottom-up surge of sentiment. Say these are ignorant, uninformed people that don't know what's good for them, and that's precisely the wrong reaction. I think what you have to do is get to the roots. Why are these people upset? Why do they think they're unfairly treated? And you can identify those things with respect to Western Canada. That's what the Liberal government should do, but there wasn't any inkling in the Prime Minister's speech the night of the election that he had a clue that he's got a unity problem on his hands, a very serious one.
So what are some of those root issues that have made the Westerners so dissatisfied?
Well, one of them is the equalization formula, where a province like Alberta has poured billions and billions and billions of dollars in equalization, much of it going to one province, the province of Quebec, and this is just considered unfair. The Alberta economy goes down and there's no reciprocal response from the national government. So the unfairness of the equalization formula, the inability to move resources from the interior of the country to tidewater and world markets.
The sense that the oil pipelines have been strangled.
Yeah, and not just that the barriers to trade, the inability. There's been investor meetings where they're trying to attract investment capital to Western Canada, where foreign investors get up and mock the name Trans-Canada. They say Trans-Canada, Trans-Mountain Pipelines. You Canadians can't trans anything. You can't build infrastructure across your provincial boundaries. You may have the second or third largest petroleum resources in the world, but you can't get them out. And it's actually a subject of ridicule. And this comes back to the inability of the federal government to actually enforce free trade in Canada itself. So there's enormous concern about that. Mr. Trudeau got upset about SNC-Lavalin losing maybe a few thousand jobs in Montreal, 150,000 jobs lost in the oil patch. And this doesn't invoke any concern or any response. So it's this list of issues, and the fiscal one is another one. Alberta just threw out a provincial government basically on the basis they couldn't manage the finances of the province. They ran up deficits and debts. They see exactly the same thing going on in Ottawa, backed up by the federal NDP. So there's this long list of things that people consider unfair and being unaddressed by the current government or by the federal parliament.
Since the election, we have watched Twitter and Facebook explode with WESTERN. Is this a joke, or do we take it seriously?
No, this is another indication of this complete alienation of particularly Alberta and Saskatchewan from the federal political process and from the Liberal government. It's just another symptom. And another thing Westerners cannot understand in that leaders debate, you have separatism running wild in Alberta and Saskatchewan. You have the BQ coming up in Quebec, and not a single question on the issue of national unity. No response from the Prime Minister. People just say there's a disconnect here. Are these people not hearing and seeing what's happening at the grassroots level, particularly in those provinces?
You actually have some opinions that there is the right way to be constructive with this dissatisfaction.
Well, I think, as we said earlier, I think you have to connect with it, first of all. You have to recognize that these people got a right to be mad. Of course they're going to be mad, and you got to connect with that. But then you can say, should that be used in a negative or destructive way, or is there some positive? The West should spell out what does it think would constitute a fair deal? What would be better terms and conditions for the West as being part of the Federation? Spell that out, and then put the ball in the court of the federal government, the federal parliament. If they respond to it, then this desire to separate will abate. If they don't respond to it, then it'll blow up even higher.
You have 7 Conservative premiers. Will they work together to spell it out?
Well, I think there'll be a lot more cooperation there. And you take Jason Kenney. He has more experience in national government than the Prime Minister. Much more experience than the Prime Minister. Look at his speeches. They're substantive.
Are you saying it might be time for a change in the Conservative Party nationally?
No, I think, and this was not pointed out by any of the commentators on election night, one of the strengths that the federal Conservatives have is the potential for alliance with 7 Conservative-oriented provincial governments.
And is Mr. Scheer the right leader for that?
He's got the capacity to make that type of relationship.
Okay, I want to turn the corner now to the voter, to this grassroots populism that's rising. Alberta, the West, Saskatchewan, this has been the home of populist movements, but they were driven often at the very core by biblical ideas, strong Christian motivation. Your own father was part of that movement in Alberta. What is the role for the Christian thoughtful process now?
Well, I think if you come back to where we started, the country's divided, and what's needed when a country's divided is a reconciliation. And in a sense, that's the ultimate function of government. I don't know if Mr. Trudeau understands that or not, that it's reconciliation of conflicting interests by non-coercive means. And at the end of the day, that's what governments have to do. And I think Christians who have an understanding of reconciliation at a very profound level, not just reconciliation by law, but reconciliation through self-sacrificial mediation, where the mediator gets between the warring parties and sacrifices his own time, his own energy, in Jesus' case, his own life, his own personal ambition in order to get the parties together. If there's a group that ought to be able to play a reconciling role in this divided country, it should be people with a Christian commitment and an understanding of reconciliation from a Christian perspective.
Preston Manning, your family has been involved in provincial politics, national politics since the early 1930s. Your perspective is deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lorna.